I caught my parents ransacking my house with movers. Mom smirked, "We're giving your deed to Wyatt and his pregnant wife." Dad barked, "You don't get a say." So I called the cops. I was 29 years old, and I was running on fumes. It was a Friday afternoon, the kind of Friday where your brain feels like it has been put through a blender after staring at financial projections and spreadsheets for 60 hours straight. My job as a financial analyst was demanding, ruthless even, but it paid the bills. And by bills, I mean it paid for the one thing in this world that was truly, unequivocally mine. My house. The drive home was my transition period. I would turn on some soft acoustic music, grip the leather steering wheel of my modest sedan, and slowly let the corporate armor melt away. I remember driving down my street that day, craving the sight of my 1970s craftsman-style home. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but to me, it was a palace. I had spent 5 years working double shifts to afford the down payment. 5 years of crunching numbers in a cubicle by day and mixing drinks as a bartender until 2 in the morning by night. Every drop of sweat, every missed social event, every hour of sleep deprivation was poured into the foundation of that house. I even painted the exterior myself. I planted those rose bushes lining the porch specifically to hide the stress of the outside world. It was my sanctuary, a physical manifestation of my independence. But as I rounded the corner onto my quiet, suburban street, my stomach hit the floor. The soft acoustic music playing from my car speakers suddenly sounded like a funeral dirge. There was a massive, commercial moving truck backed directly into my driveway. At first, my exhausted brain tried to make sense of it. I thought maybe my neighbor, Chelsea, was getting a delivery and the driver had made a mistake. But then I saw the front door. My custom, solid oak front door was propped wide open. 2 burly men in matching gray uniforms were carrying my mid-century modern coffee table right out the front door, struggling slightly as they navigated the porch steps. I slammed on the brakes, throwing my car into park right there in the middle of the street. My hands were slick with cold sweat. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened so violently I thought I was having a heart attack. Someone was robbing me. Someone had organized a full-scale operation to empty my home in broad daylight. I fumbled for my phone, my thumb shaking uncontrollably as I prepared to dial 911. But as I stumbled out of my car and my feet hit the pavement, my eyes locked onto a figure standing on the lawn. It was a woman holding a clipboard. She was pointing toward the truck, directing the men with sharp, authoritative gestures. She turned around, annoyed by the sound of my car door slamming. It was my mother, Diane. My brain short-circuited. I stood frozen on the asphalt, staring at the woman who gave birth to me. She was wearing her casual Friday golf attire, looking completely unfazed, as if she were coordinating a charity bake sale instead of orchestrating the looting of my property. Before I could even find my voice, I saw movement near the front window. Through the glass, I could clearly see my father, Victor. He was in my living room, standing over a pile of cardboard boxes. I watched in absolute horror as he carelessly grabbed pieces of my grandmother's vintage, hand-painted china, shoved them into old newspaper, and tossed them into a box. These were the heirlooms passed down specifically to me, the items I treated like fragile artifacts, and he was handling them like cheap garage sale junk. They had broken into my home. The people who were supposed to protect me were stealing my life, piece by piece, right in front of my eyes. The sheer audacity of the scene paralyzed me. It wasn't just a robbery. It was a home invasion executed by my own flesh and blood. And as I took a step forward, the pavement shifting under my feet, I knew my life was about to be divided into 2 distinct eras. Before this Friday and after. What the hell is going on here? The words ripped out of my throat, raw and trembling. I didn't scream, not yet. The shock was still acting as a buffer, muffling the full intensity of my rage. I marched up the driveway, pushing past one of the movers who gave me a confused, sideways glance. My mother lowered her clipboard. She didn't flinch. She didn't look guilty. Instead, her face settled into this terrifyingly calm, almost condescending expression. She looked at me the way a teacher looks at a disruptive toddler. "Stay away, Madison," Diane said, her voice dripping with casual authority. She actually waved her hand at me, a dismissive flick of the wrist. "You're going to get in the men's way." I stopped a few feet from her, my mind spinning violently. "Get in their way? This is my house. You broke into my house. Why are my things in a truck?" My mother let out a heavy sigh, adjusting her sunglasses on top of her head. Then she smirked. It was a tiny, subtle lifting of the corner of her mouth, but it felt like a knife slipping between my ribs. "We've decided you're giving your home to Wyatt and his pregnant wife," she announced, stating it as if it were an undeniable fact, like the sky being blue. "This place is perfect for raising a baby. You're single. You don't need all these rooms. We're handing the deed over to them, and we are moving your things into storage for now." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. Waiting for her to laugh and say it was a sick, twisted prank. But her eyes were dead serious. She had genuinely rationalized stealing my $300,000 property to give to my 32-year-old brother. Wyatt, the golden child. The one who had bounced from job to job, apartment to apartment, leaving a trail of unpaid bills and burnt bridges his entire adult life. "Are you insane?" I finally gasped, the shock wearing off and the fury flooding in. "You can't just decide to give my house away. I bought this. My name is on the mortgage. Put my things back right now." That's when my father walked out onto the porch. Victor held a roll of packing tape in one hand, looking annoyed by the commotion. He didn't greet me. He didn't look ashamed. He walked down the steps and stepped right into my personal space, towering over me. "Nobody asked you," Victor barked, his voice loud enough to echo down the street. "You don't get a say in family matters, Madison. Your brother is having a child. He needs a stable roof over his head, and this family provides for each other. You should be ashamed of your selfishness." The gaslighting was so immediate, so perfectly executed, that for a split second, I actually felt a pang of guilt. That was their superpower. They could set your world on fire and make you apologize for the smoke. But as I looked past his broad shoulders and saw my custom coffee table sitting upside down in the back of a filthy moving truck, the financial analyst inside me woke up. Logic cut through the emotional manipulation. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't scream or cry or beg them to understand. I simply took 3 steps backward, pulled my phone out of my pocket, and dialed 911. "What are you doing?" my mother snapped, her confident facade cracking slightly. "Yes, hello, emergency," I said into the receiver, my voice remarkably steady. "I need police at my address immediately. There is a home invasion in progress. The intruders have broken the locks and have a moving truck on the premises." Victor lunged forward, trying to snatch the phone from my hand, but I dodged him. "Madison, hang up that phone right now. You do not call the cops on your own family. They aren't armed, but they are hostile," I continued to the dispatcher, making eye contact with my father. The next 15 minutes were a blur of chaotic waiting. The movers, realizing they were caught in the middle of something highly illegal, immediately stopped working and retreated to the cab of their truck. My parents spent the entire time alternating between screaming at me, calling me an ungrateful brat, and trying to physically block my front door. When the police cruisers finally pulled up, lights flashing, the neighborhood went dead silent. 2 officers approached, hands resting cautiously on their belts. Victor immediately switched tactics, putting on his best charming, respectable citizen routine. He chuckled, waving his hands. "Officers, it's just a family misunderstanding. My daughter is a bit dramatic. We're just helping her move." "They broke the back door latch to get in," I told the officer flatly, pointing toward the side gate. "I did not consent to this. I want them removed, and I want to press charges for breaking and entering." The older officer went around back. 2 minutes later, he returned, pulling handcuffs from his belt. The look of absolute, earth-shattering shock on my parents' faces when the metal clicked around their wrists will be burned into my memory forever. They genuinely believed their authority as my parents superseded the law. As the officer guided Diane toward the back of the cruiser, she lost her mind. She fought the grip, twisting around to face me, her face red and distorted with pure hatred. "You are dead to us," she screamed, her voice echoing off the neighboring houses. "After everything we've done for you. You selfish, ungrateful little bitch. You're dead to me." I stood on my lawn, surrounded by my displaced furniture, watching the police cars drive away. My neighbor, Chelsea, was standing on her porch across the street, her hand covering her mouth in shock. I had protected my house, but as I stood there in the deafening silence, I realized I had just orchestrated the arrest of my own parents. The humiliation and the heartbreak were suffocating. The police left. The moving company, after apologizing profusely and explaining they were hired under false pretenses by my mother, unloaded my furniture onto the driveway and sped off. It took me 3 hours to drag everything back inside by myself. By the time the sun started to set, casting long, eerie shadows across my living room, the house felt entirely different. It felt violated. The air was heavy, smelling faintly of the cheap cologne my father wore and the industrial cardboard boxes they had stacked everywhere. A gentle knock on the door frame startled me. I looked up to see Chelsea, the neighbor from across the street, standing hesitantly on my porch holding 2 mugs of steaming tea. She had witnessed the whole ugly spectacle. "I thought you might need this," she said softly, stepping inside. She looked around at the chaos, books pulled from shelves, artwork taken down, boxes labeled in my mother's familiar, looping handwriting. "I am so sorry, Madison. Do you need me to stay?" "No," I whispered, my throat feeling like it was packed with sand. "Thank you, Chelsea. Really. I just need to figure out what's damaged." She nodded sympathetically, set the mugs down on the kitchen counter, and quietly let herself out. I sank onto the hardwood floor in the center of the living room, surrounded by the wreckage. I pulled one of the hastily taped cardboard boxes toward me. The label read "Kitchen Junk." I used my house key to slice through the tape and pulled back the flaps. My breath hitched. Lying at the bottom of the box, wrapped in nothing but a single sheet of crumpled newspaper, were my grandmother's hand-painted teacups. Or rather, what was left of them. The delicate porcelain, painted with tiny blue forget-me-nots, had been crushed under the weight of a cast-iron skillet my father had thrown in on top. I reached in with trembling fingers and pulled out the shattered pieces. The jagged edges dug into my skin. I didn't sob. I didn't scream. I just sat there, meticulously picking out every tiny shard of porcelain, separating the dust from the larger pieces. It took me 2 hours. I sat on the floor, sweeping up glass and analyzing my entire childhood. My brain, wired for financial analysis, couldn't help but view my family dynamic as a spreadsheet. For 29 years, I had been trying to balance an equation that was rigged from the start. Wyatt was the high-risk, high-reward investment. He was a boy, the firstborn, loud and demanding. My parents poured all their capital into him. New cars for his birthdays, paying off his credit cards, bailing him out of every bad decision he ever made. They viewed his failures as bad luck and his bare minimum achievements as massive successes. And then there was me. I was the low-yield savings account. The safe bet. I was quiet, got straight A's, never asked for a dime, and funded my own college tuition through scholarships and waitressing. I was completely self-sufficient, which in my parents' eyes meant I required zero maintenance and zero affection. I existed only to provide stability in the background while they focused all their energy on keeping Wyatt afloat. I held a broken piece of the teacup handle in my palm. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as an asset to be liquidated when Wyatt needed a bailout. The realization wasn't just sad, it was deeply, profoundly terrifying. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had just attempted a hostile takeover of my life. My phone had been vibrating non-stop in my pocket for hours. I finally pulled it out. The screen was a glowing wall of notifications. 30 missed calls. Over 100 text messages from extended family members. My mother had clearly made her one phone call from the precinct. I didn't read them. I held down the power button and watched the screen go black. The silence in the house was deafening, but it was safe. For the first time in my life, I was entirely alone, and for tonight, that was exactly what I needed to be. I laid down on the bare floor beside the box of broken china, curled into a tight ball, and waited for morning. I woke up on the floor. My back ached, my eyes were swollen shut from crying in my sleep, and the morning light filtering through the blinds felt aggressive. It was Saturday. Less than 24 hours had passed since the invasion, but I felt like I had aged 10 years. I dragged myself to the kitchen, made the strongest pot of coffee I could handle, and sat at the island. I couldn't hide from the world forever. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and turned my phone back on. The device immediately froze, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming data. When it finally loaded, the barrage of abuse hit me like a physical blow. Aunt Sarah, how could you do this to your mother? You are a monster. They were just trying to help your brother. Cousin Mark, calling the cops on your own parents? Over a house? You've always been a selfish brat, Madison, but this is a new low. Aunt Linda, your father has high blood pressure. If he has a stroke in that jail cell, his blood is on your hands. We are praying for your soul. I scrolled through message after message. The narrative was perfectly spun. In their version of events, Diane and Victor were just lovingly helping to pack my things for a surprise move they had arranged to a nice apartment, and I had gone completely psychotic, throwing a tantrum and calling the police on my poor, well-meaning parents. Not a single person asked for my side of the story. Not one. Then, the phone vibrated in my hand. Incoming call. Diane. My heart slammed against my ribs. They had posted bail. They were out. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the red reject button. But the financial analyst in me knew I needed data. I needed to know what their next move was. I hit accept and put it on speaker, pressing record on my laptop at the same time. Hello, I said, my voice hoarse. Madison, darling, Diane's voice purred through the speaker. It wasn't the screaming banshee from the police car. It was the sickeningly sweet, manipulative tone she used when she was trying to talk a retail worker into honoring an expired coupon. It made my skin crawl. You're out, I said flatly. Of course we're out, sweetie. It was a massive misunderstanding, she chuckled lightly, as if we were discussing a mix-up at a restaurant. Now, listen to me carefully. Your father and I have had a very long night, and we are willing to forgive your little outburst yesterday. We understand you were startled. But we need to discuss the logistics of the house transfer. I closed my eyes, rubbing my temples. There is no transfer, Mom. I am pressing charges. The police took pictures of the broken window latch. You are not getting my house. The sweet tone instantly dropped. The ice-cold reality of my mother returned. Let me remind you of something, you ungrateful little girl. 3 years ago, we gave you $8,000 to help with the down payment on that property. Without our money, you wouldn't even have that house. We have an equity stake in that property. It belongs to the family. And right now, the family needs it for Wyatt. $8,000, I repeated, feeling a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat. Mom, the house cost $300,000. I have paid the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance for 36 months by myself. Your $8,000 was a gift, and even if it wasn't, it doesn't buy you the deed. We will sue you for partial ownership, she snapped. We will drag you through civil court until you are bankrupt, Madison. You are going to let Wyatt and Paige move in, or we will destroy you financially. Think very carefully about your next move. The line went dead. I sat in the quiet kitchen, the threat ringing in my ears. I needed to secure the house. I needed to change the locks immediately. I walked to the front hallway to grab my purse and my keys. I reached for the small brass hook by the door where I always kept my spare house key. My fingers brushed against empty air. I froze. I looked at the floor, checked my purse, checked my coat pockets. Nothing. The spare key was gone. I vividly remembered seeing it there yesterday morning before I left for work. A cold wave of dread washed over me. They hadn't just broken in. During the chaos before the police arrived, one of them had pocketed my spare key. They had unfettered access to my home. I scrambled for my phone, frantically searching for a 24-hour emergency locksmith. But before I could even hit dial, I heard a sound that made my blood run absolutely cold. The sound of a key sliding into the front door lock. The heavy deadbolt clicking open. I dropped my phone on the entryway table and backed away as the front door slowly swung open. The morning sunlight spilled into the hallway, illuminating two silhouettes. It was Wyatt, and behind him, clutching a small cardboard box of kitchen utensils, was his girlfriend of 5 months, Paige. Wyatt looked entirely relaxed, wearing a backward baseball cap and basketball shorts. He pulled the key out of the lock, tossed it up in the air, caught it, and shoved it into his pocket. He looked up, finally noticing me standing there, rigid with terror and rage. "Oh, hey Mads," Wyatt said casually, kicking the door shut behind him. He looked around at the boxes still piled in the hallway from yesterday's disaster. "Man, Mom and Dad said you were dragging your feet on the packing, but you really left a mess, huh? We brought the first load of our stuff. Where do you want us to put the kitchen boxes? You cleared out the pantry yet?" My jaw practically hit the floor. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his presence short-circuited my brain. He genuinely had no idea what happened yesterday. He stood in my hallway, acting like he was moving into a college dorm room that I had kindly agreed to vacate. "What are you doing in my house, Wyatt?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Paige peeked out from behind him, looking slightly uncomfortable. She was pretty, with blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing an oversized sweatshirt that hid any sign of the supposed pregnancy. "Hi Madison," she mumbled, looking at the floor. "Thank you so much for doing this. Wyatt said you wanted to downsize anyway." I snapped my gaze back to my brother. "Downsize? Wyatt, how did you get that key?" Wyatt rolled his eyes, annoyed by my tone. "Mom gave it to me last night. She said you guys had a little argument about the moving schedule, but that you were staying at a hotel this weekend while we got settled." "Come on, Madison, don't be dramatic. I know you're probably stressed about packing, but we have a baby on the way. We need to get the nursery set up in the spare room." The level of delusion was staggering. My parents hadn't told him about the police. They hadn't told him they spent the night in a holding cell. They just handed him the stolen key and sent him into the lion's den. "Wyatt, listen to me very carefully," I said, taking a step forward. My voice was no longer trembling. It was forged from pure steel. "I never agreed to give you this house. I never agreed to move out. Mom and Dad broke into my house yesterday with a moving crew to steal my property. I called the cops. They were arrested for breaking and entering. They're out on bail right now." Wyatt froze. The casual, arrogant slouch disappeared from his posture. He looked at me, then at Paige, then back at me. "You're lying," he scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "Mom said you agreed to this weeks ago. She said you wanted to help out with the baby. Does it look like I agreed?" I gestured wildly to the half-packed boxes, the shattered grandmother's china sitting in the trash, the broken window latch in the back. "They tried to rob me, Wyatt. To give my life to you. Because apparently, your inability to keep a job or an apartment constitutes an emergency on my part. Hand over the key and get out of my house right now." Wyatt's face flushed a deep, ugly red. The golden child entitlement flared up instantly, masking his confusion with aggressive anger. He stepped toward me, using his height to try and intimidate me, a tactic he learned perfectly from our father. "You selfish bitch," Wyatt spat, the venom in his voice matching our mother's perfectly. "I'm having a kid. I'm trying to build a family. You've always had everything handed to you. You sit in your fancy office making bank while I'm struggling, and the one time Mom and Dad try to level the playing field, you call the cops on them? You're sick in the head, Madison. You care more about some stupid bricks and drywall than your own flesh and blood." "Everything handed to me?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "I worked 80 hours a week for 5 years to buy this house. You gambled away your rent money, Wyatt. That's why you got evicted. Your failures are not my financial responsibility. Now give me the key, or I am calling the cops on you for trespassing." Paige grabbed Wyatt's arm, her eyes wide with panic. "Wyatt, let's just go. Please. Let's just leave." Wyatt yanked his arm away, glaring at me with a look of absolute disgust. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the stolen spare key, and threw it as hard as he could. It bounced off my chest and clattered onto the hardwood floor. "Keep your pathetic little house," he sneered, backing toward the door. "But this isn't over, Madison. Mom and Dad are going to take you to court. You owe us. And I promise you, you're going to regret doing this to my family. He grabbed Paige's hand, pulled the front door open, and slammed it behind them so hard the picture frames on the hallway walls rattled. I stood alone in the hallway, staring at the brass key lying on the floor. I was shaking from the adrenaline, but underneath the fear, a new emotion was taking root. It was cold, calculating, and ruthless. My family had declared war on me, and I was going to make sure they lost everything. If you are enjoying the story so far, please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below telling me what city you are watching from. Every single comment helps push this video to more people, and I appreciate your support so much. Now, let's get back to the story. Sunday morning arrived with an oppressive silence. The first thing I did after waking up from another restless night on the floor was call an emergency locksmith. It cost me an absurd weekend premium, but by 10 o'clock in the morning, every lock on my doors was replaced with heavy-duty deadbolts. I also went to the local hardware store and bought a smart doorbell with a high-definition camera. I spent 2 hours drilling it into the door frame, syncing it to my phone, and watching the live feed of my empty porch. I was turning my own home into a fortress against my own family. The psychological toll of that reality was beginning to weigh heavily on my chest. Every time a car drove past my window, my heart rate spiked. Every shadow cast by the oak tree in the front yard looked like a person sneaking up to the porch. I was developing a severe case of paranoia, trapped inside the house I had worked so hard to buy. Around 1 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a motion alert from the new doorbell camera app. I grabbed the phone, my palms instantly sweating. I opened the live feed. A large, silver SUV had just pulled up and parked illegally, blocking my driveway. It was my parents' car. The doors opened, and out stepped Victor, Diane, and Wyatt. They marched up my front walkway with purpose, their faces set in grim determination. My stomach dropped into my shoes. They had been arrested barely 48 hours ago. They were out on bail, and part of their release conditions strictly prohibited them from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. They were blatantly, arrogantly violating a court order. Through the phone speaker, I heard the doorbell chime. Then came the heavy, aggressive pounding of Victor's fist against the newly reinforced oak door. "Madison, open this door," Victor bellowed, his voice distorted slightly by the camera's microphone. "Stop acting like a child and face us. We need to talk about the financial settlement for this property." I didn't answer. I stood in the kitchen, paralyzed, watching them on the small screen. Diane leaned into the camera, knowing I was probably watching. "We brought Wyatt," Diane said, her voice dripping with fake patience. "We are going to sit down at the table like adults and figure out how you are going to compensate us for the equity we hold in this house. If you don't open the door, Madison, your father is going to take the door off its hinges." They actually thought they still had power over me. They believed their parental authority could override the legal system. Suddenly, the feed showed Wyatt stepping away from the porch, walking out of the camera's view toward the side of the house. My side gate. The gate leading to the backyard and the kitchen windows. Panic seized me. I dropped the phone on the counter and bolted toward the back of the house. I slid into the kitchen just in time to hear the terrifying sound of scraping metal. Wyatt was outside, standing on top of my patio chair. He had a flathead screwdriver in his hand and was violently wedging it under the frame of the kitchen window, trying to pop the screen out. The same window they had broken the latch on during the initial invasion. "Wyatt, stop!" I screamed, slamming my hands against the glass from the inside. He jumped, startled by my sudden appearance, but he didn't stop. He wedged the screwdriver deeper, his face twisted with desperation. "Let me in, Madison. Mom and Dad said we just need to talk. Just let us in. I am calling the cops." I yelled back, backing away from the glass and grabbing my phone off the counter. I dialed 911 for the second time that weekend. "Don't do that," Wyatt yelled, finally prying the screen loose. It clattered to the patio floor. He started pushing on the glass pane, trying to force the broken latch to give way completely. "You owe us. Mom and Dad paid for this house. It's family property. They gave me $8,000, Wyatt." I screamed at the top of my lungs, my voice cracking. The house cost $300,000. They didn't pay for anything. They lied to you. Wyatt froze. He had one hand on the glass, the other holding the screwdriver. He stared at me through the window, blinking rapidly. What? No. They said they paid off the mortgage. They said you just held the title for tax reasons. They lied. I repeated, hitting the dial button on the emergency screen. They are bankrupting me to pay for your mistakes. And you are violating a restraining order right now. Before Wyatt could process the math, before he could realize he had been used as a pawn in their insane scheme, the distant wail of police sirens pierced the quiet Sunday afternoon. The dispatcher had sent units immediately due to the flagged address and the existing restraining order violation. Wyatt looked toward the street, panic flooding his eyes. He dropped the screwdriver on the patio. Madison, please, get away from my house. I yelled. He scrambled off the patio chair just as Victor and Diane came running around the side of the house. Victor grabbed Wyatt by the shirt collar, dragging him toward the side gate. They didn't look like authoritative parents anymore. They looked like panicked criminals fleeing a crime scene. I watched from the kitchen window as they scrambled into their SUV and peeled out of the neighborhood, tires screeching, leaving me alone in a house that felt more like a prison than a home. Monday morning. I had to go back to work. I had to put on a tailored suit, tie my hair into a neat bun, and pretend my entire world hadn't spontaneously combusted over the weekend. Driving to the office, I felt like an alien trying to blend in with humans. I walked into the sleek, glass-paneled lobby of my financial firm, swiped my badge, and rode the elevator to the 15th floor. People were standing by the coffee machine complaining about traffic and discussing weekend football games. It felt absurd. It felt like I was watching a movie where I didn't know my lines. I sat at my desk, opened up my dual monitors, and tried to focus on the quarterly risk assessment report due at noon. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time my desk phone rang, I flinched, terrified it was Diane calling from a burner number. Every time the elevator doors dinged, I expected Victor to march out and demand I hand over the deed in the middle of the bullpen. Around 11 o'clock, the numbers on my spreadsheet started blurring together. I was staring blankly at a cell containing a projected revenue margin, but all I saw was my grandmother's shattered teacup. Madison? You got a minute? I jumped in my chair, nearly knocking over my coffee mug. My boss, Derek, was standing at the edge of my cubicle. Derek was a senior partner, a stern, no-nonsense guy in his late 50s who valued efficiency above all else. Yes, Derek. Sorry. Just deep in the report, I lied, quickly minimizing the spreadsheet. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at me. His brow furrowed. Step into my office, please. My stomach tied into knots. I followed him into his corner office, the door clicking shut behind us, sealing out the hum of the trading floor. I assumed I was about to be reprimanded for my lack of focus. I sat in the leather chair across from his massive mahogany desk. Clasped. Derek didn't sit down immediately. He walked over to a small mini fridge in the corner of his office, pulled out a bottle of water, and set it gently on the desk in front of me. Then he took his seat, folded his hands over his blotter, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. It wasn't the look of a manager evaluating an employee. It was the look of a father observing a terrified kid. Madison, Derek started, his voice uncharacteristically soft. You look like you haven't slept in a month. Your hands are shaking so badly you can barely hold your mouse. You have been my best analyst for 3 years, but right now, you look like you are about to shatter into a million pieces. What is going on? I tried to swallow, but my throat was painfully dry. I opened my mouth to give him a corporate, sanitized excuse. I wanted to tell him I had a minor family emergency, or maybe a bad bout of food poisoning. But the moment I looked into his eyes, the armor I had spent all weekend forging just snapped. The sheer weight of the betrayal, the police, the broken window, the screaming, it all crashed down on me. To my absolute horror, I started to cry. Right there in the senior partner's office. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying to stop the tears, but a ragged sob tore out of my throat anyway. Derek didn't panic. He simply pulled a box of tissues from his drawer and slid it across the desk. He waited patiently, giving me the dignity of silence until I could catch my breath. When I finally managed to speak, I gave him the abridged version. I told him about the moving truck. I told him about the break-in, the police arrest, the fake narrative my extended family was spreading, and my brother trying to pry open my kitchen window just 24 hours ago. Hearing the words out loud in a sterile corporate environment made the whole situation sound even more psychotic. Derek listened without interrupting. As I spoke, his jaw tightened, and a look of absolute disgust settled over his features. "I am so sorry, Derek," I whispered, wiping my face with a tissue. "I didn't mean to bring my personal drama into the office. I can finish the quarterly report by noon, I promise. I just need a minute to pull myself together." Derek held up a hand, stopping me. "Madison, stop. Stop apologizing for surviving a nightmare. The quarterly report can wait. The Peterson account can wait. Your parents attempted to steal your home and have systematically terrorized you. That is not personal drama. That is a crime." He turned to his computer monitor and clicked his mouse a few times. "You are not working this week. I am putting you on paid administrative leave for the next 5 days. I don't want to see you in this building until next Monday. But my projects," I started to protest, "will be handled by the junior associates," Derek interrupted firmly. "Furthermore, I know legal battles are expensive. If you need a corporate advance on your end-of-year bonus to cover retainer fees for a good attorney, you let me know today, and I will have HR wire it to your account by 5 o'clock. You need to protect yourself, Madison. And you cannot do that if you are worried about spreadsheets." I sat back in my chair, utterly stunned. I had spent 29 years trying to earn basic respect and protection from my own blood relatives, only to be treated like an ATM and a doormat. Yet here was a man who only knew me through profit margins and corporate meetings, offering me a safety net without a second thought. The contrast was so sharp it physically ached. "Thank you," I choked out, fresh tears welling up. "I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll hire a shark of a lawyer," Derek replied, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Go home, Madison. Lock your doors. Take care of yourself." I walked out of the office building at noon that Monday feeling a strange, unfamiliar sensation in my chest. It wasn't just relief. It was validation. The universe was giving me permission to fight back. Armed with Derek's support and a clear schedule, my first stop was the law office of Vanessa Hastings. Vanessa was highly recommended by a corporate colleague, a shark in a tailored suit who specialized in property disputes and restraining orders. Sitting in her sleek, modern office, I laid out the timeline, the police reports, and the photos of my broken locks. Vanessa reviewed everything with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. "Legally speaking, Madison, your parents are standing on quicksand," Vanessa said, tapping her expensive pen against the legal pad. "The $8,000 they gave you 3 years ago is legally classified as a gift unless they can produce a signed promissory note detailing a repayment schedule. Which they can't. They have zero equity in your home. Furthermore, their actions, breaking and entering, attempting to move your possessions without consent, and violating the temporary restraining order, completely obliterate any civil claim they could ever attempt to make. We are going to petition the court to make the restraining order permanent." I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. "So they can't take the house?" "They can't even take a blade of grass from your front lawn," Vanessa assured me. "But be prepared. Desperate people do desperate things. When abusers realize they are losing control, they usually escalate before they give up." Her words were prophetic. When I returned to my house later that afternoon, the quiet was broken by the chime of my laptop. I had received a certified email from Victor's personal account. The subject line read, "Outstanding debt collection, final notice." My heart did a familiar, anxious flutter, but I forced myself to open the attachment. It was an Excel spreadsheet. I stared at the screen, my analytical brain taking over as I scanned the columns. My parents had meticulously itemized my entire existence. It wasn't just the $8,000 for the down payment. It was a terrifying, absurdly detailed log of every dollar they felt they had ever invested in me. There was a line item for $5,000, labeled high school extracurriculars and transportation. There was another for $12,000, listed as college room and board contribution, even though I had lived in a tiny off-campus apartment and paid my own rent with my bartending tips. They even included a charge for $200 labeled orthodontic copay from 1998. At the very bottom, highlighted in bright, aggressive yellow, was the total sum they were demanding I pay them immediately in exchange for dropping their claim on my house, $40,000. Below the spreadsheet was a typed letter from my mother. It read, "Madison, since you have decided to involve the authorities and treat us like criminals, we will treat you like a debtor. You owe this family $40,000. If you do not sign the deed of the house over to Wyatt by Friday, we will take this invoice to a civil judge and garnish your wages until we are repaid. Do the right thing. Stop tearing this family apart." A few days ago, this email would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and panic. I would have questioned my own reality. I would have wondered if I truly was the ungrateful monster they claimed I was. But sitting in my kitchen, looking at a spreadsheet that literally assigned a dollar value to my childhood, something inside me finally snapped. The last remaining thread of daughterly affection withered and died. They didn't love me. They never loved me. I was just an insurance policy. A long-term investment they were trying to cash out prematurely to save their golden child. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I downloaded the spreadsheet, attached it to a new email, and forwarded it directly to Vanessa with a single sentence: "Add this to the extortion file." Then I closed my laptop, walked into my living room, and started unpacking my boxes. I put my books back on the shelves. I hung my artwork back on the walls. With every item I put back in its rightful place, my resolve hardened. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. On Wednesday morning, my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I hadn't blocked yet. It was Wyatt. "Wyatt, Madison, please. I need to talk to you. Alone. No mom and dad. Please, I'm begging you. Just 15 minutes. My immediate instinct was to ignore it. But Vanessa's advice echoed in my head: let them talk, give them enough rope to hang themselves. I agreed to meet him, but on my terms. I chose a crowded, well-lit coffee shop downtown, miles away from my neighborhood. Before I stepped out of my car, I hit record on my phone's voice memo app and slipped the device into the breast pocket of my jacket. When I walked into the coffee shop, I almost didn't recognize my brother. The arrogant, entitled guy who had thrown a key at my chest just a few days ago was gone. Wyatt looked like a ghost. He was unshaven, wearing the same hoodie he had worn on Sunday, and he had dark, bruised-looking circles under his bloodshot eyes. He was hunched over a paper cup of black coffee, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. I sat down across from him, keeping my posture rigid and professional. "You have 15 minutes, Wyatt. Talk." He looked up, swallowing hard. He looked terrified. "Madison, I messed up. I messed up worse than you can possibly imagine. You broke my kitchen window while violating a restraining order," I said coldly. "Yes, I would say that qualifies as messing up." No, not just that," Wyatt stammered, rubbing his trembling hands over his face. "The apartment. I didn't just get evicted because of bad luck or a strict landlord. I got evicted because I haven't paid rent in 4 months. I stared at him, waiting for the rest of the excuse. "Where did your salary go, Wyatt?" He dropped his gaze to the table. "Poker. Online casinos. Underground games. It started a year ago. I thought I could beat the system. I thought I could double my paycheck and finally stop relying on mom and dad. But I lost. And then I borrowed money to win it back, and I lost that too. Madison, I owe $15,000 to some very, very bad people. Bookies. The kind of guys who know where I live. Or where I used to live." The pieces suddenly started falling into place with sickening clarity. "And mom and dad knew about this?" Wyatt nodded miserably. "I told them a month ago when the bookies started making threats. I asked them for a loan. They said they didn't have the cash. But then mom came up with the plan. She said you were single, making great money, and that you didn't need a whole house to yourself. She said if we could just get me into your house, I wouldn't have to pay rent, and mom and dad could take out a line of credit against your property value to pay off my $15,000 debt." I felt bile rise in my throat. The sheer level of premeditated evil was staggering. They planned to steal my equity to pay off your illegal gambling debts. And you went along with it. They made it sound so easy. Wyatt pleaded, his voice cracking. They told me you were completely on board. They told me you agreed to move into an apartment because you wanted to help me out before the baby arrived. When I walked into your house on Saturday, I genuinely thought I was supposed to be there. I didn't know they broke your locks. I didn't know they got arrested. But you knew on Sunday, I shot back, leaning forward. You knew on Sunday when you tried to pry open my kitchen window with a screwdriver. Wyatt covered his face with his hands, a pathetic, muffled sob escaping his lips. I panicked. Mom told me if we didn't get into the house that weekend, the bookies were going to hurt me. She said you were just being stubborn and that if I pushed hard enough, you'd cave. I was so scared, Madison. I was just so scared. I sat back, looking at the broken shell of my older brother. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a coward, a pawn manipulated by our parents' desperate need to maintain the illusion of a perfect family. I'm going to a rehabilitation center in Colorado, Wyatt whispered, wiping his nose with the back of his sleeve. I check in on Friday. It's an inpatient program for gambling addiction. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. I know you'll never forgive me, but I didn't want to steal from you. I was just drowning, and Mom threw me your house like a life raft. I didn't offer him absolution. I didn't reach across the table to hold his hand. Go to rehab, Wyatt, I said quietly. Get clean. But do not ever approach my property again. I stood up, leaving my untouched coffee on the table, and walked out, the recorder in my pocket capturing every damning word. I had barely processed Wyatt's confession when the universe threw another massive curveball at me. Later that same evening, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. Unknown, Madison, it's Paige. Wyatt's girlfriend. I know you hate us, but I need to see you. Wyatt doesn't know I'm texting you. Please. It's about the house and your parents. Meet me at the Botanical Gardens tomorrow at noon. The Botanical Gardens were a public, open space with plenty of foot traffic. It felt safe enough. I forwarded the text to Vanessa just in case, and the next day, I found myself sitting on a wooden bench surrounded by blooming cherry blossoms, waiting for my brother's pregnant girlfriend. Paige arrived 10 minutes late. She looked completely different from the girl who had stood in my hallway on Saturday. She was wearing a large trench coat, oversized sunglasses, and she was carrying a massive duffel bag over her shoulder. She looked around nervously, like a spy making a dead drop, before sitting down on the far edge of the bench. Thank you for coming, she mumbled, keeping her eyes fixed on the gravel path. I'm leaving town tonight. I'm taking a Greyhound bus back to my parents' house in Seattle. Why the sudden exit? I asked carefully. Wyatt told me yesterday he's going to rehab. Shouldn't you be staying to support him? Especially with the baby coming? Paige let out a choked, bitter laugh. She reached up and pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. She unzipped her purse, pulled out her phone, and unlocked the screen. She navigated to an app with a pink icon and shoved the phone into my hands. It was a menstrual cycle tracking app. The calendar was filled with regular, monthly markers. There was no missed cycle. There was no pregnancy. I'm not pregnant, Madison, Paige whispered, the words hanging heavily in the spring air. There is no baby. There never was. I stared at the glowing screen, my brain stalling. What? But, Mom said. Wyatt said. It was a lie, Paige confessed, burying her face in her hands. It was all a giant, twisted lie. When Wyatt told your parents about the bookies and the $15,000 debt, your mother panicked. She knew they couldn't just demand your house to pay off a gambling debt. She knew you would say no. So, she came up with the baby. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. My mother invented a fake grandchild? Paige nodded miserably. She pulled me aside at dinner a month ago. She told me that if I pretended to be pregnant, it would force you to give up the house out of guilt. She said it was the only way to save Wyatt's life. She told me we only had to fake it for a few months until the deed was signed over to Wyatt, and then we could claim I had a miscarriage. She even sent me links to fake ultrasound pictures to post on Facebook. The sheer depravity of it took my breath away. They were willing to fake the creation and the death of a child just to steal my property. Why did you go along with it? I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. Because I loved him, Paige sobbed quietly. And because your mother is terrifying. She made me feel like if I didn't do this, Wyatt's death at the hands of those bookies would be my fault. But after this weekend, after seeing them get arrested, after seeing Wyatt try to break into your window like a criminal, I can't do it anymore. This family is sick. I packed my bags this morning. She reached into her duffel bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She handed it to me. What's this? I asked. Printed screenshots, Paige said, wiping her eyes. Every text message between me and your mother planning the fake pregnancy. Voice memos of her telling me what to say to you. Texts from Wyatt begging me to keep up the lie so he wouldn't go to jail for the gambling debts. Take it. Use it against them in court. It's the least I can do before I disappear. I held the envelope, feeling the weight of the evidence inside. It wasn't just proof of their manipulation, it was a silver bullet that would destroy any shred of credibility my parents had left in a courtroom. Thank you, Paige, I said sincerely. Have a safe trip to Seattle. I watched her walk away down the gravel path, dragging her duffel bag behind her. My parents had built a massive house of cards on a foundation of lies, and I was holding the match that was going to burn it all down. When it rains, it pours. And for Victor and Diane, a Category 5 hurricane was about to make landfall. That evening, I was sitting at my kitchen island, organizing the screenshots Paige had given me into a pristine binder for Vanessa. My laptop pinged with a new email notification. The sender was Caroline Evans. My Aunt Caroline. My father's younger sister. Aunt Caroline was the quiet one at family gatherings. She was a certified public accountant who always wore sensible shoes, rarely drank, and mostly observed the family chaos from the sidelines. I hadn't spoken to her in a year. The subject line of the email was simply, "I am so sorry. Here is the truth." I opened the email. There was a brief message and a massive PDF attachment containing over 50 pages of scanned documents. Madison, I have sat back and watched Victor and Diane favor Wyatt for 3 decades. I convinced myself it wasn't my place to intervene. But after the lies they spread this weekend, and after I saw them try to destroy the life you built for yourself, I can no longer stay silent. I do their taxes every year. I manage their accounts. They have forbidden me from telling anyone the reality of their situation, but you need this to protect yourself. Use it. I will testify to its authenticity if your lawyer needs me. Love, Aunt Caroline. My heart hammered against my ribs as I double-clicked the PDF. The first page was a summary sheet Aunt Caroline had typed up. As I read the numbers, the true, horrifying scope of my parents' desperation came into focus. Victor and Diane were entirely, irrevocably bankrupt. Page after page revealed the financial autopsy of their lives. 5 years ago, they had taken out a massive second mortgage on their own suburban home. Why? To pay off Wyatt's previous gambling debts and a lawsuit he had settled out of court after a drunk driving incident he had kept hidden from the rest of the family. But it didn't stop there. The documents showed 3 different credit cards, all maxed out to their absolute limits, totaling nearly $60,000 in consumer debt. Their retirement accounts were completely drained. They had 0 savings. They were 3 months behind on their own mortgage payments, and the bank had just issued a pre-foreclosure warning. They weren't trying to steal my house just to give Wyatt a place to live. That was only Phase 1. Phase 2 was far more sinister. According to a series of frantic emails between Victor and a predatory lending agent, which Aunt Caroline had conveniently intercepted, my parents planned to force me to add their names to the deed of my house. Once their names were on my property, they planned to use the $300,000 of equity I had built to take out a massive secured loan. They were going to use my house as collateral to pay off their own debts and Wyatt's bookies. If their plan had worked, if I had caved to the pressure on that Friday afternoon, they would have drained the equity from my home, defaulted on the new loan, and the bank would have foreclosed on my house. They would have left me homeless and financially ruined, just to buy themselves a few more years of pretending they were a perfect, upper-middle-class family. The final page of the PDF was the most chilling. It was a photograph Aunt Caroline had snapped of a page from my mother's personal planner, left open on her desk during a tax meeting. In Diane's neat, looping handwriting, she had written a checklist under the heading Madison Strategy 1, remind her of the $8,000 down payment gift, make her feel like she owes us. 2. Use Wyatt's baby to trigger her empathy. 3. If she resists, threaten public humiliation with the family. 4. Must use financial guilt to keep Madison in line. She is our only viable asset left. I am our only viable asset left. I traced the words on the screen with my finger. Any lingering doubt, any tiny, microscopic fragment of a daughter's love that might have survived the weekend, was instantly incinerated. They didn't see me as a human being. I was a piggy bank they were perfectly willing to smash with a hammer. I picked up my phone and called Vanessa. It was 9 o'clock at night, but she answered on the second ring. "Vanessa," I said, my voice eerily calm, vibrating with a cold, terrifying clarity. "Check your email. I just sent you the nuclear codes." The human body is an incredible machine, capable of absorbing massive amounts of stress to keep you moving through a crisis. But eventually, the body keeps the score, and it demands payment. My payment came due on a Thursday night, just 12 hours before the scheduled preliminary hearing for the criminal charges against my parents. I was standing in my kitchen, ironing the charcoal gray suit I planned to wear to court, when my vision suddenly tunneled. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears, drowning out the hum of the refrigerator. Then, a crushing, agonizing pressure clamped down on my chest. It felt like an elephant was standing on my sternum. I couldn't draw a breath. I dropped the iron. Thankfully it landed on the tile floor, missing my foot, and collapsed against the kitchen island, gasping for air. The left side of my face went numb. A blinding pain shot through the back of my skull. A migraine, more severe than anything I had ever experienced, blinded me. I legitimately thought I was having a stroke. I managed to drag my phone off the counter and hit the emergency speed dial for Chelsea, my neighbor. 10 minutes later, Chelsea was practically carrying me to her car. 30 minutes after that, I was lying in a sterile emergency room bay, hooked up to N4 drip, heart monitors beeping rhythmically around me. The ER doctor, a kind woman with tired eyes, reviewed my charts. "Your heart is fine, Madison. You are experiencing a severe, acute panic attack combined with a stress-induced ocular migraine. Your blood pressure is through the roof. What has been going on in your life lately?" I let out a weak, humorless laugh. "Just a minor family disagreement." The doctor prescribed me a mild sedative, pumped me full of fluids, and told me I needed to rest. But rest was impossible. As I lay in the uncomfortable hospital bed staring at the fluorescent ceiling lights, my phone, resting on the bedside table, began to vibrate. It was Vanessa. I fumbled for the phone with the hand that didn't have an N4 needle in it. "Hello." "Madison, where are you?" "I've been trying to reach you for an hour." Vanessa's voice was sharp, laced with adrenaline. "Hospital. Panic attack." "I'm fine." "What's wrong? Did the hearing get canceled?" "No. The hearing is definitely happening tomorrow." "But the charges just got a lot worse," Vanessa said, taking a deep breath. "Your parents were just arrested again." My brain, sluggish from the medication, struggled to process the words. "Arrested? Again? For what?" "About 2 hours ago, Victor and Diane showed up at Paige's apartment complex," Vanessa explained, her tone entirely professional but tinged with disbelief. "They figured out that Paige was leaving town, and they assumed correctly that she might testify or provide evidence against them. They cornered her in the parking lot. Diane was screaming at her, trying to physically grab Paige's luggage. Victor was threatening her, telling her that if she spoke to you or the police, he would ruin her life." I closed my eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. They just couldn't stop digging their own grave. "Paige locked herself in her car and called 911, Vanessa continued. "Because your parents are out on bail for a felony, and because Paige is a witness in an ongoing criminal investigation, the police didn't mess around. They arrested Victor and Diane on the spot for violating bail conditions, assault, and felony witness intimidation." They're sitting in county jail right now, and they will not be getting bail this time. I lay there in the quiet emergency room, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filling the silence. The monsters who had terrorized me, who had made me feel so unsafe in my own home that my body literally shut down, were locked in a concrete cell. "Are you okay, Madison?" Vanessa asked softly. "Yeah," I whispered, the sedative finally starting to pull me under. "Yeah, Vanessa. For the first time in 29 years, I think I actually am." The courthouse was a grand, intimidating building made of cold marble and echoing hallways. I walked through the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom wearing my charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back tightly. I felt like a warrior stepping onto a battlefield wearing armor made of pure facts and evidence. Vanessa walked beside me, carrying a thick leather briefcase that held the ruin of my parents' lies. I took my seat at the witness stand when called, keeping my posture perfectly straight. Then, the side door opened, and the bailiff led my parents into the room. I barely recognized them. They were wearing standard-issue Orange County Jail jumpsuits. Their wrists and ankles were shackled, the chains clinking softly against the polished wood floor. Diane's carefully dyed hair was a tangled, greasy mess. Victor's face was pale and hollow. Stripped of their suburban country club clothes and their arrogant entitlement, they just looked small. Pathetic and small. Wyatt was not there. He had officially checked into the rehabilitation facility in Colorado 2 days prior, leaving his parents to face the music alone. The hearing was a massacre. The prosecutor, armed with the evidence Vanessa had provided, dismantled my parents piece by piece. First came the audio recording from the coffee shop, where Wyatt confessed to the gambling debt and the plot to steal the house. Victor closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping as his golden child's voice echoed through the courtroom, selling them out. Next came the screenshots from Paige. The judge, a stern man with no patience for nonsense, adjusted his glasses as he read the text messages where Diane instructed Paige on how to fake morning sickness to manipulate me. But the final nail in the coffin was Aunt Caroline's ledger. The prosecutor entered the bank statements and the photograph of Diane's journal into the official record, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the break-in was a premeditated act of financial extortion motivated by severe bankruptcy. The public defender representing my parents looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk. He had absolutely nothing to offer in their defense. No family misunderstanding excuse could survive a documented paper trail of extortion and witness intimidation. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was like cracking a whip. In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of such breathtaking entitlement and parental betrayal. The judge addressed Victor and Diane, looking down at them from his elevated desk. "You viewed your daughter not as a human being, but as a financial asset to be plundered. You broke into her home, terrorized her, fabricated a pregnancy, and then attempted to intimidate a witness to cover your tracks. You are a disgrace." Because this was a plea deal hearing to avoid a lengthy trial, and because they were first-time offenders in their 60s, the judge accepted the prosecutor's recommended sentence, but applied the maximum penalties within that bracket. Victor and Diane were sentenced to 2 years of heavily monitored probation. They were ordered to pay massive fines and restitution for the damage to my property. They were assigned 500 hours of community service. And finally, the judge granted my request. He issued a permanent, lifetime restraining order. If they ever came within 1,000 feet of me, my home, or my workplace, they would immediately serve 5 years in state prison. As the bailiff stepped forward to escort them back to holding to process their release, Diane stopped. She turned to look at me. Tears were streaming down her face, cutting through the grime on her cheeks. Her lips trembled. She looked at me, her eyes begging for a lifeline, begging for the daughter who had always stayed quiet and compliant to step forward and save her one last time. I sat perfectly still at the plaintiff's table. I looked directly into her eyes. I didn't smile and I didn't sneer. I just looked at her with the absolute, chilling emptiness of a stranger. Diane let out a broken sob and turned away, shuffling out the door behind her husband, the chains around their ankles dragging on the floor. The heavy wooden door clicked shut. It was over. 6 months later. The air was crisp, carrying the sweet scent of blooming jasmine and barbecue smoke. I stood in my kitchen, wearing old paint-splattered jeans, putting the final coat of white gloss on the kitchen window frame that Wyatt had broken. The house was quiet, but it was a warm, comfortable quiet. The oppressive, terrifying shadows that had haunted these walls during the invasion were gone, chased away by time and an aggressive amount of therapy. Outside in my backyard, a party was in full swing. It was my official reclaiming party. Derek, my boss, was standing by the grill flipping burgers, laughing loudly at a joke Chelsea was telling. Aunt Caroline was sitting in a lawn chair, sipping a glass of iced tea, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen her. Vanessa, my lawyer, had even dropped by to drop off a bottle of expensive champagne. This was my family now. A family built on mutual respect, kindness, and truth, rather than blood and obligation. As I washed the paint from my hands in the sink, my phone buzzed in my back pocket. I dried my hands on a towel and pulled it out. It was a text message from a Colorado area code. Wyatt. Wyatt, 6 months sober today. I got my chip. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I am not asking for it. I just wanted you to know that I am trying to be better. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. I hope your house looks beautiful. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. Over the past 6 months, I had received a few updates about my parents from Aunt Caroline. They had been forced to sell their suburban home at a massive loss to avoid foreclosure. They were now renting a tiny, cramped apartment on the bad side of town, working miserable retail jobs to pay off their court fines and consumer debt. They had tried to reach out to me once through a third party, still playing the victims, still refusing to take accountability. The restraining order ensured they couldn't try again. But Wyatt was putting in the work. He was facing his demons instead of expecting me to slay them for him. I didn't feel the burning resentment toward him anymore. It had burned itself out, leaving behind a cautious, distant neutrality. I wasn't ready to invite him to my barbecue. I wasn't ready to call him my brother again. But I didn't want to carry the weight of hating him forever. I typed out a short, simple reply. Madison, proud of you for getting the chip. Keep going. I hit send, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and walked out the back door into the sunshine, joining the people who actually loved me. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was perfectly still, I walked out to my front porch. I stood by the rose bushes I had planted 3 years ago. They had survived the winter, and now they were blooming more fiercely than ever, their thick, thorny roots gripping tightly to the soil. I looked at my sturdy oak front door, the heavy brass locks gleaming under the porch light. I had fought a war for this property. I had sacrificed the illusion of my biological family to keep it. The pain of realizing your parents don't love you is a wound that never fully closes. It just turns into a scar you learn to live with. But standing there in the cool night air, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I had established a boundary made of iron and law. I had proven to myself that I was not a piggy bank, not a doormat, and certainly not a victim. I was the master of my own life. Looking back, a part of me mourns the family I thought I had. But the walls of this house stand tall, protecting the peace I bled for. I didn't just keep my property, I reclaimed my soul. But I have to ask, was I wrong to push for the absolute maximum penalty and a permanent restraining order, knowing my parents are completely bankrupt and aging? Or should I have dropped the criminal charges once my house was safely back in my hands? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button to hear more stories about surviving family toxicity, exposing golden child syndrome, and taking your power back. See you in the next one.